My name is Scot Rice. My wife's name is Flo Rice. She told her story just a few minutes ago, and now I want to tell you mine. We are two ordinary Americans. We lived an ordinary American life in an ordinary American town. We want what all Americans want: the American dream of seeing our children and now grandchildren grow and prosper, have a nice home, happy holidays, enjoyed with family and friends, quiet weekends around the TV watching football, vacations once in a while, and jobs that pay the bills. Our lives were probably not very different than yours until May 18th, 2018. That's when everything changed forever. Our lives are measured as before May 18th and after May 18th, and not in a good way. Friday, May 18th, 2018 started out like any other day. Flo and I were looking forward to a nice, relaxing weekend. Flo was scheduled to work at her job as a substitute teacher at Santa Fe High School, as she had for 4 years. Flo enjoyed her position and was dedicated to her students. That Friday morning, Flo was in a bit of a panic to find her keys. It was about 6:40 a.m. when she woke me up to ask if I had seen them. I told her no, to take her daughter's truck instead, and I would look for the keys. Right after she left, I found them. I texted Flo and told her I had the keys. Her response was, "I feel so dumb." Sort of like the thousands of seemingly unimportant text messages husbands and wives send all the time. You don't think much about when you do. Thing is, it might have been the last communication between us, but we, of course, had no way of knowing it. It was still early when Flo left, so I went back to sleep. I wanted to get in just a bit more shut-eye before Ashley, my daughter-in-law, would be by with my grandson, Declan. I had promised to babysit him all day that Friday and was trying to get as much sleep as possible before they arrived. And then at 7:34 a.m., Flo called me, but I didn't hear it. I wasn't expecting to hear back from her, as she should have been working at that time. Flo called back a second time at 7:34 a.m. This time, thankfully, I heard it and answered. She says, "I've been shot and I'm in the parking lot." Then she hung up. You can imagine getting a call like that from your wife, who had left home less than an hour earlier. Not really being awake and not fully comprehending what was going on, I jumped up and put on my dirty clothes from the day before. I wanted to get to Flo as soon as possible. That's all that mattered. I tried to make sense of what was going on. My mind was racing. Was it some kind of accident? Was it intentional? I tried to comprehend what I just heard. Who shot Flo? And why would anyone ever want to shoot her? Was it one school shooter or two or more? So I grabbed my handguns and two extra clips. By now it's 7:35 a.m. My phone rang again and it was Flo. This time I could hear gunfire in the background. She whispered, "I've been shot and I think I'm in the parking lot." Then the phone went silent. What I didn't know at the time was that Flo had been shot in both legs a total of 6 times by a sawed-off shotgun with double-aught buckshot. By a 17-year-old student wearing a black duster, the uniform of the school shooter, and a duplicate vintage communist pen just like the one worn by one of the Columbine killers in 1999, who was also 17. I, of course, didn't know it at the time, but Flo's left femur had been blown in half. She had fallen face first on the hard ground. Flo was disoriented and she was terrified. She was in excruciating pain and in fear she would be shot again. Somehow she managed to crawl out the door and onto the sidewalk next to her friend and fellow teacher, Ann Perkins, who was already deceased. Flo explained to me later, just minutes before the gunfire, she had had one of those conversations that had happened all across the country between coworkers. Ann had told Flo she was looking forward to it as she and her husband Steve Perkins has become a friend. We talk about the conversations that Ann had from time to time and support each other. A senior at Santa Fe High School. Thankfully, she was not scheduled to go in later that morning, or she caught in the middle of developing war. We had two family members to worry about. I found Shannon downstairs eating her lunch and told her, "Get into my car to school." Shannon was stunned, shocked as any teenager would be upon hearing this horrific news. We ran the door together and got in my car. I called my daughter-in-law, Ashley, and Flo shot at school. Later, Ashley told me she was thinking, if you don't want to babysit, just say so. You don't have to make this stuff up. However, it was just a story and not reality. It was now 7:41 a.m., and I was racing to school with Shannon to get to Flo. Flo said, "Please, I've been shot. I can't move." And then silence again. We're flying on Highway 6 in Santa Fe. The highway was filled with cars, and we were behind law enforcement and other first responders. We passed some who slowed for intersections and red lights. Was going to stop me. I raced. I was terrified. Just an hour ago, our biggest problem was finding her lost keys. Now I didn't know if Flo was. 7:43 a.m., Flo called back. She was trying to describe to me exactly where on the campus she was. She desperately tried to describe to me where I could find her, but she was disoriented and she was losing blood. Nothing she said made sense to me. I feared when I finally got to the school she might not be alive anymore. I told her, "Just hang on. I'm almost there." After what seemed to be an eternity, Shannon and I entered the front driveway to the school. My eyes looked around. I didn't see Flo anywhere. We were flying through the parking lot, frantically looking for her. At 7:44 a.m., Flo called back. She asked me if I was in the Mustang. I said, "Yes." She says, "I hear you." Flo tried desperately to describe where she was. Finally, she gives me enough clues to make me realize I know where she is. Flo's behind the school where the kids are dropped off by the school buses in the morning. I tried to pull up by the art wing. Everything was happening a million miles a second. And in slow motion at the time, I tried to drive closer to the area of the school, but was waved off by two officers. I was told, "Go around. You can't come here." So I pulled back out and drove to another entrance where the buses pick up kids after school. I was now behind the cafeteria next to the dumpsters. I could see Flo. There must have been at least 100 feet of grass separating us. Flo was on the ground motionless and was merely a few feet away from her and had been shot in the torso heroically, trying to push students out the door to safety after she observed the shooter in the hallway. I shake my head whenever I think of what Ann and Flo's experienced that day. We don't expect law enforcement to teach our kids. Why do we expect teachers to act like SWAT and soft targets that are now our nation's schools? There was an officer standing near Flo with his gun out next to the back door. I jumped out of the car. I tossed my guns on the floor so not to be confused as another school shooter. I could hear multiple shots going off and see glass flying out of the windows. It turned out where we were was in direct line of fire coming from the hallway where Officer John Barnes was standing. I later learned that he had been shot himself while engaging the shooter. I told Shannon to get out of the car and take cover. Get behind the dumpsters, I said. I took off running towards Flo. Officer Bandit was adamantly motioning me to get back. So I held up my phone and I was telling him, "That's my wife. She's alive." Two officers had been locked outside the door stepping over Flo because they presumed she was dead. Later, she recounted that she could hear the officers' radios and she heard them say, "We don't have eyes on the shooter." So she was intentionally lying still and had her phone under her head and was playing dead. Flo was relegated to playing dead because she had been shot from behind by a coward who entered the front of the school where she worked, right by the staff. Kamikaze style, armed with a sawed-off shotgun and a .38 revolver, a duffel bag full of ammunition, and homemade pipe bombs. 6 out of the 8 .33 caliber pellets from the shotgun blast had hit Flo below the waist. Somehow, Flo managed to reach in her purse and grab her cell phone. She crawled out the door to safety and called me, not 911. She knew, come hell or high water, I would save her. There's no doubt in my mind, due to her rapid blood loss and injuries, Flo would have been the 11th person murdered that day if she didn't crawl away or if her cell phone had fallen somewhere else. Officer Bandit reached down and touched Flo, asking her if she was alive. He was very surprised when she opened her eyes. He reached down and picked her up while telling her to put her arms around his neck. Officer Bandit ran full speed toward me, running like an angel with wings. It happened so fast and supernatural. Gunfire was still being exchanged and we could hear bullets flying through the air. We placed Flo in the passenger seat, having to be very careful with her severely injured leg that was just dangling from her body. We placed her in the passenger seat. Her blood soaked everything, but her blue jeans hid the true damage that had been done to her. To Flo's surprise, Shannon, who had been hiding behind the dumpster, suddenly jumped in the car. Flo was concerned that I'd brought Shannon with me. One of the things Flo had been thinking about while laying there, waiting for help, was that Shannon was safe at home. Now, that comforting feeling was replaced by a new fear that I had brought her into the most dangerous place she could be. A modern-day school shooting in America. But there's no playbook to instruct you what to do in these situations. I didn't want to take Shannon with me, but I was more afraid to leave her not knowing that her mother was shot and dying, and maybe never being able to see her again or being able to say goodbye. Now that Flo was feeling safe and rescued, the realization of the intense pain started to kick in. Shannon was draped over her from behind, holding her legs still and comforting her. We took off like a rocket, driving towards Maple Street, which runs behind the school. By this time, the road in and out of the school had been blocked off, blocking my progress. I was blaring the horn, yelling at people out the window to let me through. We drove in the ditch and were waving people out of the way. After we finally got past all the roadblocks, we talked about which hospital would be the best to treat Flo and which was the closest. We settled on the new UTMB hospital in nearby League City, approximately 8 miles away. It was so surreal to be flying down the highway in the center lane while ambulance and police were surrounding areas were going in the opposite direction toward the high school. We got to the hospital in about half the time it would normally take. And as soon as I pulled up to the emergency room, I jumped out of the car and yelled for help. The nurses and staff jumped into action. We could hear a life-flight helicopter leaving as we arrived. And the hospital was taken by surprise by our arrival. I told the medical staff Flo had been shot in a school shooting. The word hadn't gotten out yet that there was a mass shooting going on at Santa Fe High School and to expect wounded patients. And Flo's wounds were quickly evaluated and she was treated for the pain. Her leg was stabilized. In the meantime, I stood in the waiting room watching images on television of the war zone I'd just left. By this time, some family and friends had started showing up to see Flo. The doctors, who had counted 11 holes in Flo's legs and hip area, they explained to me this meant she had been shot 6 times with 11 entrance and exit wounds, leaving 1 bullet still inside her body. They decided Flo needed to be transferred to a level 1 trauma hospital in Galveston. So they loaded her up in an ambulance and off we went. 30 minutes later, we arrived in Galveston. This time we were expected and met by a big reception of emergency personnel, reporters, and security. It was frightening and bizarre, as if we were the stars of some terrifying horror film we never wanted to be in. Only this was real, very real. The emergency staff got busy and took Flo away to assess the severity of her injuries. Later, her doctors told us they needed to operate to put a rod in Flo's body. They said the surgery would take approximately 4 hours, so I went to a private waiting room to join some of my family and friends. They were watching the news as it unfolded, and sadly, the number of the deceased kept going up. After 8 hours of pacing back and forth, worried about Flo, I was worried if she would live. I was worried about what was taking so long. And if she lived, would she ever be walk again? It was a constant flow of worry and anguish. Then we were told the surgery was over and Flo was recovering and that we would be able to see her when she woke up. As it turned out, the doctors did a fantastic job rebuilding her shattered leg with the help of an 18-inch rod in the center of her femur, from her hip to her knee. Several bolts and wire were inserted around the bone. Flo was hospitalized for about 2 months. Following years of physical therapy, she went from a wheelchair to a walker and then a cane to now being able to walk with a slight limp and some pain. Flo has even returned to her favorite pastime of jogging for short distances. Every step in pain is a constant reminder. Although the physical scars are fading, the mental and physiological wounds are permanent. Every time Flo learns of yet another shooting, it takes her back to May 18, 2018. She relives that horrible day over and over again. Whereas we used to plan vacations strictly for leisure, we now plan getaways based on the calendar. Flo cannot be home on July 4th or New Year's because the constant fireworks remind her of gunshots. And under no circumstances can we be in Santa Fe on the anniversary of the shooting when all these commemorative events happen. It's just too painful for Flo to bear. Flo is now a member of an ever growing club no American ever wants to join of mass shooting survivors. She also belongs to a large support group of like minded people that have been through the same trauma. It was established by a group of survivors from the Columbine High School attack. Together, Flo and I have gotten involved in activities intended to prevent the next one being planned right now in a basement or a bedroom somewhere across America. Unfortunately, it seems like it's an impossible goal to reach as more and more lives are destroyed by the latest preventable episode. Those responsible for all the tears and pain and suffering from Columbine to Uvalde, giving off remarkably predictable signs that we keep missing or ignoring. To me, that's probably the biggest travesty of all. So, my question is, what are we doing today to make schools safer? Should we shut down our schools like we did for COVID till they're safe? My opinion is yes. Thank you. My name's Scot Rice.